Good afternoon, good morning, hello, around the world from here, from the ISBD review group. Welcome to our webinar from ISBD to ISBDM. My name is Renate, I'm chairing the ISBDM task force group, and we would like to inform you today. First of all, thank you so much for your participation. I know for many of you, the time of the day or even the night or the morning is not ideal, but thank you for coming. Thank you for your interest. For a certain time now, the IFLA ISBD review group has been working on a transformation of the ISBD into an ISBD for manifestation. Today, we would like to inform you, as I said, and about the status of the work, about our further planning, but at the same time, we would like to start a dialogue process and share ideas and thoughts with you and your communities. Before we start with the presentations, allow me to have a few announcements. The whole webinar will be recorded and will be made publicly available after. Please switch off your microphone and camera and only switch them on when requested by the moderator to ask a question. If you do not wish to be seen in the recording, please ensure that your camera is switched off and your name is not shown at all times. There will be a panel for discussion at the end of the event. You're welcome to raise your questions directly in the panel session, or you can post your comments and questions in the Q&A section during the whole webinar. The Q&A section will be moderated during the entire event, and all your questions and comments will be brought into the panel session. Let us have a short look on the program before we can start. Here you can see we will have a presentation session about 2 hours. Then we will have a short 10 minutes comfort break, and the rest of the time we will have, as announced, the panel discussion. So thank you again for coming, and I will stop to share my screen. I would like to introduce you our first presenter. It's Gordon Dunsire. I think he is very much well known. He is an independent consultant coming from Edinburgh in Scotland. He's a member of several IFLA sections and groups like the IFLA cataloguing section, the ISBD review group, Press OO review group, and the BCM review group. He is perhaps mostly known as an ex-chair of the RDA steering committee. He's a member of the RSC technical working group, and from his home place in Great Britain, he's a member of the UK committee on RDA. So, Gordon, please, the floor is yours. You can share your screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Renate. I should also point out that we are going to take questions in the end. During the panel discussion, not at the end of each presentation. So during the presentations, please, if any questions occur to you, if you could add them through Q&A or chat, and someone will coordinate the questions for the panel discussion at the end. So if you have any questions about my presentations, there'll be an opportunity for me to respond in the last part of this webinar. So I'm going to give a very general introduction to the context and background of the work that we are carrying out in the ISBD for Manifestation project. And one of the contexts of this is entity-based cataloging, which is kind of a buzz thing at the moment. So I thought I would just give a very general introduction to entity-based cataloging, very brief, you'll be pleased to hear, and talk about how it has impacted on the project's work, and indeed how the project is informing the entire concept of entity-based cataloging. So entity-based cataloging arises, as the name suggests, from the use of entity relationship modeling techniques in bibliographic standards, which has been going on now for the best part of 20 years. In entity relationship modeling, entities are identified as the things that we wish to describe, and they are distinguished, different kinds of entities distinguished from one another by their characteristics, which we model as attribute elements. Entities that are related to one another or associated with one another are linked by relationship elements, and by linking the descriptions of specific entities that are associated with each other, we build a so-called complete description of whatever it is we're trying to describe. When we come to our world, the world of cultural heritage resources, what we have found, again, over the past 20 years is that rather than treat a resource, a cultural heritage resource, as a monolithic entity, the trend has been to split the resource into component entities, each of which is an aspect or a facet of the characteristics of the resource as a whole. In Ferber, for example, the resource entity is split into work, expression, manifestation, and item. The reason for this should be fairly apparent from the models which take this approach of a multifaceted resource. But generally speaking, the finer granularity improves the flexibility of our descriptions and indeed their reusability. IFLA has a suite of bibliographic standards. We don't currently call it a family because the relationships between the members are not entirely clear. But in broad terms, the IFLA bibliographic standards cover all of the facets or aspects of metadata description. The library reference model acts as a conceptual model and the beginnings of a data model. It suggests the data model. The ISBD, which is the focus of our webinar today, is a metadata content standard. It tells us how to describe things using the metadata model. And Unimark is the encoding scheme that allows a certain amount of additional flexibility and reusability, and I'll come back to this at the end of the presentation. The interesting thing, however, is that the library reference model is entity-based. It's an entity relationship model, whereas neither of ISBD nor Unimark is currently entity-based. This project is looking to make ISBD entity-based, and there is a parallel project running in the Unimark community to also turn Unimark into an entity-based standard. These are the entities that we are having to model and catalog within the library reference model itself. For reasons which will become apparent during these presentations, the current project is focusing only on the modeling and description of manifestations. This is in the phase 1 of the project. A second phase of the project, if phase 1 is successful, will extend coverage to cover all of the library reference entities. I've excluded res here. I'm not going to explain why. You can ask a question at the end if you want to. So what are the challenges in moving from ISBD to ISBD for manifestation? The first and biggest challenge is that the current ISBD, as I've mentioned, does not use a sophisticated entity model for resources. It's monolithic. Indeed, the only entity declared in the ISBD current namespace is resource. Resource is not an LRM entity. So we have an immediate challenge. However, the primary focus of the current ISBD is describing manifestations. So this gives us some hope. However, there is significant coverage of the entity's expression and work that's embedded within the current ISBD. Another huge issue is that the current ISBD does not cover relationships. There are no relationship elements in the current ISBD. It only covers attribute elements, and these are the attributes of manifestation, expression, and work. ISBD also conflates the transcription of metadata from the manifestation according to the principle of representation, but it conflates how the manifestation describes itself with how the cataloger describes the manifestation. These things are not always in harmony. The LRM recognizes the issue and has introduced a specific element manifestation statement to accommodate pure transcription information according to that principle of representation. So again, although these are significant challenges, we do see from the get-go that there are potential ways to resolve them. One of the features of the project that we're carrying out at the moment, and I think more will be said about this in other presentations, is that because of the two phases of the project, we can contemplate something we're calling standalone ISBDM. As I pointed out, the current ISBD is primarily focused on manifestation, and a crude guesstimate is that ISBD for manifestation will cover 80 to 90% of the coverage of the current ISBD. Phase 2 extension to ISBD will take at least 2 to 3 years. This is a complete guess. This first phase, which is dealing with only one entity, is going to take 3 years minimum. It may be a 4-year project from start to finish. And thirdly, of course, is phase 2 may never happen for all sorts of reasons. This has led us to take the view that we should try to develop ISBD for manifestation as a standalone standard that can be used immediately without waiting for the completion of phase 2. And we should also develop ISBD for manifestation in the context of the larger phase 2. In other words, what we do for manifestation must be compatible with any future development of the other LRM entities. So we have ended up in a situation where we are trying to develop a content standard for a single entity that actually belongs to a much larger suite of entities. And secondly, that the entity that we are developing is a component entity of a resource, the full description of which is what we're aiming at. So we have perforce had to concentrate on what happens when you can only describe one entity in this family of entities. And this has given us some significant insights into what entity-based cataloging may actually mean in practice, as well as theory. So we have developed a number of techniques which are generally applicable outside of this project. The first one is that all relationships are descended from a very broad relationship which says that manifestation is related or associated with one of the LRM entities. The value of that relationship can be the URI of the related entity, but we're not necessarily dealing with purely linked data implementations, although the LRM is optimized towards this. And so we must allow for string-based relationship implementations as well. So currently, the related identity can also be identified or labeled with an identifier such as an ISSN or ISBN or an authorized access point. But we're not allowing other strings to be used here. We've introduced the concept of notes, which provide missing information that we cannot adequately supply in the description when we're focusing solely on the manifestation. We have no access to the properties, the attributes, or the relationship elements of these other entities because they have not yet been developed. And so an unstructured note provides a catch-all for information that we may wish to include in the description of a manifestation that relates to a related entity. We have introduced a method for describing the content, which is expression and work level characteristics, to give some indication of the content that is embodied in a manifestation. And we're using the RDA Onyx framework for that purpose. This, in fact, is a shortcut, a linked data shortcut, which again is a generally applicable method to this situation of one entity cataloging, because the intermediary entity, in this case an expression, is simply not described. The dashed oval indicates something that is not being described at all. So we can put information about expression into the manifestation description without actually using the expression entity. Another issue with manifestations in particular is their structural complexity. So this is the WEMI model extended. Manifestations are associated with items that exemplify them, more than one item per manifestation. Manifestations have internal structures. They can be a part of a larger manifestation, and they can have parts themselves. We're using the terminology of units to avoid conflation with the term part, which is used elsewhere in the LRM with a different meaning. The manifestation is embodying content, which is an expression, one or more expressions. And we can also embed or relate information about the embodied works directly using what is also a shortcut element, as it turns out. But this is the structural model of a manifestation, and it is quite complex. When we look at Unimark, then, I'm close to the end here, we find that entity-based metadata of itself is optimized for linked data, as I've mentioned, but also relational or object database implementations using string matching techniques. However, entity-based metadata is not suitable for other implementation scenarios, such as bibliographic authority, which, for example, is the current state of Unimark, or one record, one resource flat file implementations. We can indeed use ISBDM metadata directly. If we are talking about a linked data implementation, then IFLA will provide a namespace for ISBDM properties, entities, etc. And that can be used to directly encode ISBDM metadata in a linked data scenario. It could also be extended to relational database implementations as well, just by using the labels of the properties. However, Unimark is certainly more efficient for this. Instead of using a property name, you can use a very short code. It makes machine processing slightly faster, certainly makes it more accurate. It's more efficient in local scenarios. For example, it's language free. And so if ISBDM is being used in a specific language environment and we do not provide a translation of it, then Unimark is a kind of universal translator approach. And again, it's worthwhile having Unimark carry ISBDM data. Clearly, being able to encode ISBDM in Unimark is also going to be useful for retroconverting legacy systems and the interchange of metadata. But I don't want to give people the impression that Unimark is the only method of encoding ISBDM metadata, or indeed that linked data is the only way of doing it. It would be perfectly possible to encode ISBDM metadata in other suitable encoding systems, but the emphasis is on suitable. To this end, because of these things and the fact that Unimark and ISBD are in the same organization, IFLA, the project has a liaison with the permanent Unimark committee to ensure that we're not diverging too much in our project development. So finally, what's this all going to look like? This is my idea of a potential end user display of ISBDM metadata. It looks nothing at all like ISBD. I deliberately did not make it look like ISBD. But you can see that, in fact, all of the information that's useful to an end user is presented. It's presented in different styles depending on the utility of the data. We have at the top the statements. These things will become more apparent in the next presentation. This is meant to segue into it. We have statements at the top. We have the labels associated with this manifestation. In the second part, we have the relationships between this manifestation and other entities in the third part. And then we have the characteristics or attributes of the manifestation in the final part. But this is entirely my view of one way of displaying ISBDM metadata. And we will see in the following presentations how this fits into the way that we've structured ISBDM itself. Thank you. I hope some of you have put questions in the question box, but we'll answer them at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gordon, for presenting this to us. Before going ahead, I think we have two colleagues from our group who are monitoring the Q&A section, and I think Sabina, she would like to have a technical announcement for our guests, please.
Yes, it should have been the way that the chat is disabled from the start, but it hasn't been that way. And I just want to make sure that the Q&A tool works as intended. So please put a question. Oh, works fine. Thank you. So the chat will be disabled for the event. Please use the Q&A tool. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabina, for this advice. And I think it works fine because I can see something in the Q&A section. So thank you for this. We are eager to have your questions and comments. At the end of the session, the Q&A section, as said before, is monitored during the whole session, the whole webinar. And so thank you for filling in there. But let's go ahead with the presentations, with the information we would like to give to you. The next presentation will be given by two very much experienced colleagues, IFLA colleagues. One is Rehab from Bibliotheca Alexandria, and she is doing her presentation together with Mikael Wetterstrom, coming from the ISSN International Center in Paris. Thank you both for giving us the informations, and please, you can start.
So thank you, Renate. I am so pleased with Renate and all my colleagues in the Manifestation Task Force and the ISBD Review Group to welcome you in this webinar. I am Rehab. I am from Egypt. I work at the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, and I'm currently the chair of the ISBD Review Group. And like Renate presented us, we are going to present you two presentations, one on the concept of reshaping the ISBD, then followed by Mikael, our colleague Mikael, who is going to present the second part, the ISBDM tool. So in order to understand what is why and how we reshaped the ISBD, we have to understand and to study the entity relationship model impact on the ISBD structure. And that's from the beginning when we had this the LRM, the consolidation of the conceptual model into the LRM. So it presented us with a new paradigm. We thinking data instead of record, and they introduced new concepts as elements like manifestation statement, representative expression, and all the other new entities that you know about. And also many attributes that turn to be now relationship to give more to make bibliographic standard more relational, the model itself more relational and optimized to link data environment. That's to cope with the technological development, and also to make it more modular. This had a huge impact it has incited a huge bibliographic transition that incited other content standard to restructure themselves, like the 3R project of the RDA that was already aligned to the Ferber models or the Ferber family of models, but they found themselves with this new paradigm. They had to do a restructure and a reshape. In the ISBD review group, the problem has been situated from early. It has been identified. So the pre-2018 aligning the ISBD to LRM outcome has what started in the purpose of alignment ended to be a mapping. And it is the document on mapping between on mapping the ISBD to IFLA LRM states in its front matter that this semantic mapping between the element set of the ISBD and the elements of LRM could not be considered a formal alignment or viewed as alignment. Also, the outcome were that not everything could be mapped to the LRM manifestation, not everything in the ISBD. We are talking about the ISBD now. And the relationship, as Gordon has presented, are not mapped unless explicit, manifestation to manifestation, and this results into we are having the top entity in the ISBD, which is resource mapped to the WEMI entities at different levels. So what we need to do to be able to align to put this to align to this new paradigm, bibliographic paradigm, is to have this new component, or to make them explicit, like entities, attributes, relationship, vocabulary encoding scheme, the manifestation statement, and the element types and their different recording methods and actionable links. So in 2019, we established the ISBD review group, established the ISBD for Manifestation Task Force, which sponsored this webinar, to complete an alignment, not a mapping this time, to LRM at the manifestation level, and work out element set for the alignment, not in the purpose of mapping, because at the mapping level, we can say, yes, we have this element, maybe we are more granular because we are a content standard and LRM is a conceptual model, the overarching model, but we meant the alignment in the sense of making available all the components of this new paradigm. And to develop stipulation for them, and to have provision for transforming, because we decided to work at the manifestation entity level, this alignment, and so we have among the TOR, the terms of reference, to have provision for transforming this first alignment, first phase, into a full implementation. Eventually, this alignment, even at the manifestation level, would lead to a new structure of the ISBD. By the time we developed the terms of reference, we didn't know what we will be seeing now and what we saw in Gordon's, but we imagined that we need a new structure and a new publication form to optimize this new structure. Why the manifestation? Like Gordon has mentioned, it's a focus, the manifestation entity, the focus of the current ISBD. And if you go beyond the ISBD itself, the manifestation entity is has the longest list of elements. It works at the practical level cataloging, and it's applicable, immediately applicable. So until a full implementation will be developed, catalogers and cataloging agency can go and use it. Start apply it. For this to happen, we have developed some baseline decision to develop the ISBD into a modular standard to have a structure shifting away from traditional bibliographic standard, and to reconstruct the stipulation and to optimize data utility and usage. Together, the components and the baseline decision, they form the specs of the ISBD for manifestation. So in order to know how what really was the structure and where did we get it. We want to know about what was the structure of ISBD. So you know it, it's a general chapter, the areas and area 0 that had that vocabulary. The update that we just published this year has added another vocabulary other than the RDA Onyx categorization of content and media type. They added the production process. But still, let's have a closer look into the areas themselves. So, as we mentioned, the ISBD resource maps to WEMI entities, and within area, we are always introduced by the prescribed punctuation, but the problem resides here, that we have the elements and stipulation and a print-based traditional bibliographic standard layout. This numbering and sub-numbering of the book like bibliographic standard. The stipulations in the ISBD, although they are thorough and prescriptive, but they lack categorization. As you see, because of this traditional layout. Let's also examine what we had and what we have actually now in relationship in terms of relationship and vocabularies. So the relationship not explicit, but the vocabularies are different and a more in-depth also problem. There are hidden vocabularies set that we find like the career type attributes in the glossary mixed with because the glossary of any content standard has all the terminology that you can have elements mixed with vocabularies. But there are even more hidden and incomplete vocabularies in terms of vocabulary encoding scheme that we don't only find in glossaries, but in the element set, in examples, and sometimes in stipulation. Like here you see that the composition of material, we have it here in the examples. We have here the video formats, between brackets here in the example, while they are preceded by the career types. And even for the reduction ratio, we found the vocabulary encoding scheme in the stipulations themselves, not there. So the vocabulary encoding schemes are not obvious. So what we want to achieve in the ISBDM, this is what we have seen is where do we come from? What we want to achieve, we want to achieve modularity, more clarity, more usability. So to work on putting in action this, in application, this entity relationship model by making the element of link data and vocabulary is obvious and at the forefront, and base the structure on this to achieve interoperability with counterpart like other content standard as RDA, and to work on the metadata utility and data portability in systems and their processing in online information system, and also to what would be the use of this, that they will use it in namespaces, in mark formats, and in other also formats. So the ISBDM components and arrangement will have element reference cards, making each element self-contained for clarity and better understanding, stating its type, definition, scope, broader and narrower element. The domain is always the manifestation for all elements, but the range can be the manifestation or any other entity, and the transcription rules and so on. And to make the relationship more explicit, manifestation to manifestation and manifestation to other entities, to have the attributes element and element value, and that's equivalent of what we called in ISBD, what you maybe know as recording methods for each type of element. And the vocabularies, and also to assist the catalogers and the cataloging agencies, we have developed workflows to support the catalogers' pre-recording decision and to guide through appropriate process for the description based on the number of units you're having and you're cataloging, and if it is a complete or incomplete to be completed or continuing resources manifestation, like the serial monograph and serial type. For the ISBD element, we worked on making clear what the transcription versus the recording elements and manifestation statement. So as it is very important, this new introduction in the LRM model, the manifestation statement, we have accommodated them in the ISBDM, and they work for coarse granularity only, and it's their importance is to show how the manifestation presents itself to the user. They want to know how it presents itself, because this item was this element was introduced in the LRM based on feedback from users, and the subtypes of the manifestation statements element mapped to ISBD area, like the title and responsibility, the edition, the publisher, producer, manufacturer, distribution, and they are only for display and keyword indexing. They are not meant for something more than that. For the recording elements, they are for finer granularity. These are the attribute elements, and usually use the controlled vocabulary authority file link to authority file, but we don't prescribe which vocabulary the ISBDM, I mean, doesn't prescribe which controlled vocabulary to use or authority file. We make only this possible. So the delivery of ISBM will have as component all of this, the LRM entities, even if not already all having elements and sub-elements as the manifestation, but relationship to link to them. The attributes, the relationship, the manifestation statement, the vocabulary encoding scheme, syntax encoding scheme, according to which level of prescription will be having for each element or sub-element. This is something to be developed, is in development. The metadata utility, the element values, that the recording method, and the workflow. And for its use, readiness and transition. So as we said, we have developed it to be a standalone and self-contained, to be immediately applicable. And also it is extensible to ISBD LRM to be a full implementation. So you don't have, we don't have to destruct and reconstruct again when we in phase 2 will be developing a full implementation for LRM. And for this, we have employed or developed some devices to manage this transition, like there are shortcuts like a category of manifestation that will be mapped to the expression content type. So what we have achieved in the ISBDM is the alignment to LRM, new component modularity, data utility extensibility, but also more clarity and more value to the catalogers and cataloging agencies. Now we are going to see with Mikael the demo of this ISBDM tool. Thank you.
Thank you, Rehab, for the time being. And I think Mikael is starting his presentation. Yes, thank you, Mikael.
Thank you, Rehab and Gordon and Renate. So this presentation is based on a selection of screenshots of a website that demonstrates the potential content layout and style of the ISBD for manifestation as an online tool. So compared to the current ISBD, the ISBD for manifestation proposes a completely different structure and an entity-based cataloging environment approach. And one factor, as mentioned earlier, is one factor that has a bigger impact on this is the introduction of relationships compared to the current ISBD, which is purely descriptive. So this draft ISBDM has a standard website navigation system with the main menu on the left-hand side there vertically. It also has the main menu horizontally on all pages. So the main menu includes introduction, a new section called assessment. Then there's 4 sections on the elements. So there's statements, notes, attributes, and relationships. And then there's a section on values, one on glossary, and then ends on examples. So this presentation will look at a selection of these sections, including some subsections, starting with the introduction. So the introduction takes inspiration from the current introduction to ISBD, but it removes large parts of it and adds new information that's more relevant to an entity-based manifestation content standard. The sources of information have been extensively analyzed and have been simplified compared to the current ISBD. The approach was to generalize the sources of information and rely more on cataloger judgment than on a prescribed set of sources. So therefore, the sources have been split into just 2 sections. The manifestation itself and external sources. The metadata utility and processing subsection provides context to catalogers about what actually happens to the metadata that they have created. For example, how is it used? How is it processed in modern information retrieval systems? There's, for example, a table which shows the statements values are used for uncontrolled keyword indexing, while relationships values are controlled and can be used for browsing and linking. So the assessment section recognizes that under the LRM, the structure of the manifestation is influenced by 3 distinct characteristics. The first one is the number of units, which is the number of physical or logical parts that are in the manifestation. Second one is number of expressions, and that determines whether the manifestation is treated as an aggregate or not. And then there's completeness of content, and that concerns serial works. For consistency and compatibility, ISBDM suggests using the RDA terminology, diachronic works here. So the idea of this assessment is that a number of decisions should be taken by a cataloger before starting to create the metadata. So when assessing these characteristics, a manifestation is either one or more than one unit. A manifestation embodies either one or more than one expression. A manifestation embodies expressions of works that are either static or planned to be embodied over time. And this translates into questions like, am I going to describe the whole manifestation, or am I going to describe one of its units, or all of its units, or some of its units? For aggregates, do I want to describe all embodied expressions or just the main expression? And how complete is the manifestation that I'm trying to describe? Am I, for example, describing a static issue of a serial or the serial that it belongs to? And there's some need for special guidance or stipulations for diachronic works that are incomplete, because this has not been so clear in previous ISBD traditions. So the elements, they have been categorized into 4 distinct categories, as we've heard before. So statements supporting the general principle of representation. There's the notes, there's the attributes, and the relationships, which are brand new to the ISBD. So all elements start with a general stipulation section. And these stipulations relate to all elements within the specific element category. And then there's specific stipulation for subtypes elements. And the reference card has been mentioned earlier. So all elements have a regular layout. There's element subtypes listed in the menu on the left-hand side, and an element reference card on the right-hand side. So this card has always got the same labels: definition, scope note, domain, range, subtype, supertype. And of course, at the moment, the manifestation is the only domain. So the element reference code is followed by additional information about how to apply the element, and or by specific stipulations for subtype elements. So if an element is a subtype element, there's a standard set of stipulations that always states to apply the general stipulations and to apply the stipulations for this element supertype, unless they are overwritten by element subtype specific stipulations. So this allows to avoid repetition of stipulations and that apply to more than one element. So the statements are first up of the elements. The value for statements is always a literal string. So it's a transcribed value that is uncontrolled, useful for keyword indexing. And the source of information can only be the manifestation itself, due to the principle of representation. So statement elements have a separate section on transcription rules, as you can see on the screen there. This is in order to provide some normalization on how to get what is displayed on the manifestation into the metadata that you're creating more easily. So this is still a work in progress, but so far it's based on the current ISBD and RDA rules. So the has a manifestation statement is a supertype element. It's intended to describe how the manifestation represents itself. So this is the pure principle of representation. So some of the element subtypes here is where the old ISBD areas have evolved. So for example, there is statement of addition, which is old area 2, statement of identifier in terms of availability, area 8, statement of issue or iteration, some of old ISBD area 6, statement of publication, etc., old area 4, statement of specific category, that's some of area 0 and 3, and then the statement of title and responsibility, which is area 1. So again, all statements contain uncontrolled values, which means that they are not controlled by the cataloger, but rather by the publisher or the author of the manifestation. So the principle of representation suggests that we should not change it. And that is why these are a little broader than before, because all you can do with the content, well, other than display, is keyword indexing. So the relationships are new to the ISBD. They have elements super and subtypes for agent entities, resource entities, that is a work, expression, manifestation, and item, place and time span entities, and a nomen. I've got a couple of slides here which shows relationship subtypes for all entities, which you can refer to later when the slides will be available. I'm going to skip through. So relationship elements are used to record values for access point, identifier, or IRI of a related entity. These are control values that complement the uncontrolled values of the manifestation statement elements. And the notes are familiar to the ISBD. There's a general supertype note, has note on manifestation, which has a subtype notes for each manifestation statement subtype elements. There is also has note on entity associated with the manifestation, with subtypes for all LRM entities, so that you can say something about all the related entities, even if you are not describing those entities. I think this was mentioned in the first presentation by Gordon as well. Attribute elements, mainly based on existing ISBD legacy elements, along with some RDA Onyx framework. An attribute element has control or uncontrolled string values. Many of the attribute elements' control values can be found in the ISBDM values section, which comes next. So the values section has a set of control terms that are used as values for a specific ISBDM attribute element. There are vocabularies for category of carrier, category of content, media type, and those three are all RDA Onyx framework. There is ISBD production process and ISBD unitary structure as well. There is a glossary, which is a work in progress. And finally, there is a section on examples. And the idea here is to have a section with full examples of ISBDM descriptions. And that was all I had to say about this.
Thank you, Mikael. Thank you for your presentation. And both Rehab and you, thank you so much for this insight in the ongoing process we are going through. And in the last year, we made many basic decisions in the ISBDM task force, and we found out that there are two topics that we have to have a look more granular, more deeper, and broader at the same time, because the ISBDM should be, as an IFLA standard, as international as it could be. And so we decided to have to establish two subgroups, one for the topic prescription and granularity, and one for examples. And these groups were established in fall last year. They just started their work, and I'm very happy that we can have two presentations now, one from Gordon and one from Mirna to describe the work of these subgroups and what the intention is behind this work. In the program, I think Gordon would like to start with the first working subgroup about prescription and granularity, because I think every standard has to reflect about how prescripted and how granular it would be, should be, have to be. And that's what will be done in this subgroup. So please, Gordon, here is your presentation. You can start immediately.
Thank you, Renate. So as Renate has explained, we need a particular focus on issues of prescription and granularity. We need to discuss this in a wider group of people than just the 3 or 4 people who are working. In fact, there's 6 or 7 of us working directly on the project. So I'm mentoring the subgroup on prescription and granularity. So the aims of the group, the general characteristics of the group are that it's a task and finish group. That means it has a specific set of tasks to do, and it has to do it in a limited time scale. When those tasks are completed, the group will be disbanded. And the general aim of the group is to assist the core task force in developing these specific aspects of ISBD for manifestation. These are specific aspects associated with the prescription of stipulations and the granularity of elements in which data can be recorded. There is one constraint or instruction to the group. The ISBD for Manifestation Task Force asked the ISBD review group last year if it wished to retain a prescriptive approach that is in the current ISBD within the context of ISBDM. And the review group indicated that we should try to retain as much prescription as possible. The main reasons for this are to maximize consistency and reusability of ISBD data, and I'm referring specifically to ISBD here and not ISBDM, and to maximize the local utility and global interoperability of the metadata produced under ISBD or ISBDM. So nothing has changed in these two views of the review group, but what has changed very significantly is the context in which we have to implement this. So there is a tension when we talk about prescription in metadata. It's very true that the consistency of content of metadata will improve its reuse. The obvious fact staring us in the face is that we are describing manifestations which actually occur in multiple libraries, multiple agencies across the world. The reason being, I know this sounds very trivial, but it's an in-your-face fact that manifestations are exemplified in multiple copies or items. And that when we describe a manifestation, we are describing the main characteristics of the main common characteristics of every one of these items. And therefore, we are describing something that is likely to be found in multiple collections. So obviously, consistency of description of descriptive content is highly desirable. The problem is that each of these collections has a local context. That context may be driven by cultural and social factors, the language of the end users, the language of cataloging, the cultural expectations of end users, the educational level of end users, etc. And each of the local collections is designed, the metadata is certainly designed to support services that are associated with that collection. And those services change depending on the kind of library, etc., the context of the library in which the collection is maintained and made available. So we have the traditional differences in academic, public and special libraries, but you can make these differences in other ways and you will still find that there's this range. So if we are to meet the needs of local metadata requirements, both for end users and local services, inevitably we're going to increase in consistency of content. So there's an innate tension in any standard that is attempting the two goals that I mentioned on the previous slide. That is interoperability and global reuse, but also maximum take-up. These goals are in tension with one another. And IFLA attempted to resolve this over a 2-decade period with the Program for Universal Bibliographic Control and failed. It's important to remember that. So the approach of imposing consistency has been tried seriously and it has failed. So the new approach to UBC, or the global utility of IFLA metadata, it now has to be achieved through a completely different mechanism. I'm calling this semantic integration. It's what I was alluding to in the first presentation. It's a consistent, integrated, semantically coherent approach to the model, to the content, and to the encoding. This involves, for this semantic integration, two principal mechanisms. One is the granularity of the entities and elements that are being described in local contexts. Sometimes you just need to say something as an agent. In other cases, you need to say something as a person. And entity and element hierarchies achieve interoperability in those situations. And the second main mechanism is maps between the vocabularies, the controlled vocabularies that provide values. So if ISBDM has a controlled vocabulary for materials, wood, glass, etc., and we wish to make that interoperable with, say, the materials vocabulary of RDA, then we can produce a semantic map between the two. And that also then achieves semantic integration at global level. So within ISBDM, we have a whole range of specific challenges, which is why we need a specific group to look at them. There's the whole question of mandatory stipulations. What does it mean, and how do you indicate that the stipulation is mandatory? What does mandatory, if applicable, mean? All these things. These are all well-worn problems, issues, and each standard comes to its own conclusion about how to represent what you must do and separate from what you should do. One of the changes in prescription that has arisen from the things that Rehab and Mikael said in their previous presentation and in my previous presentation is that the prescription of sources of information, which is a major feature of the current ISBD, now only applies to manifestation elements, and it's a very light touch. The reason for this is the principle of representation. I'm not going to go into detail about these are the topics we're actively discussing. Should there be an order of preference when there's more than one distinct value for an element? If a manifestation has two places of publication, should we make it mandatory that both of them have to be recorded, or just one of them? And if it's just one of them, which one? And what about sub-elements? That's the element hierarchies that I was talking about in the previous slide. If I can describe a relationship as being a creator of manifestation, that is broader than if I was to say that the relationship is distributor of manifestation, for example. And if I have a statement about a distributor and a printer, what's my order of preference? Should we prescribe value vocabularies for attribute elements? At the moment, we are very seriously leaning towards prescribing the use of the RDA Onyx value vocabularies, which are not RDA, they're RDA Onyx, which is a separate thing. So we're thinking of making those prescriptive. But what about other value vocabularies? If we make a value vocabulary prescriptive, then we're not allowing other values to be used. We're not allowing local choice. And because relationship elements are all brand new, how do you construct an access point? How do you construct an authorized access point? What does a variant access point mean, etc.? So all of these things are subject to that tension that I mentioned on the previous page. This is a screenshot from our Basecamp page. It is just indicating that we're discussing multiple topics. 2 or 3 of these have already been resolved in draft. Others remain active, and we're absolutely certain that there will be more arising from our discussions and indeed this webinar. Keep asking those questions. I'm coming back to this diagram. It's been mentioned in my presentation and in Mikael's presentation. The complexity of the structure of a manifestation affects the granularity of its description. So we have to answer questions or provide guidance on what entities must be included in a description of a manifestation. What is the minimum requirement? What entities should be included? That is, which entities should be included that make this particular piece of metadata useful, not just to my local application, but to people I wish to share it with. And then how should I include entities in the description? Am I going to use IRIs? Am I going to use authorized access points or identifiers? So ISBDM must provide some kind of guidance here for its users to answer these questions. So granularity and prescription are interlocked, and that's why it's a prescription and granularity task force. I'm just going to go into one of the topics, or maybe two, in slightly more detail to give you a flavor of what we have to discuss. In general, in ISBDM and in similar content standards, attribute elements tend to be associated with value vocabularies. That is, if we are controlling the identity, labels, etc. of these values. And so attribute elements tend to have concept schemes or category schemes associated with them. And Mikael's mentioned already the categorization schemes that we're using based on the RDA-ONIX framework. When we come to relationship elements, however, we're not talking about labels for concepts or categories. We're talking about individuals. That is, members of a class, instances of an entity. And so there are two different kinds of controlled vocabularies that can be applied to elements. We have to take account of where these vocabularies are coming from and how they are maintained, and what is the relationship between the maintenance of these vocabularies and the maintenance of ISBDM. So what we find doing this analysis is that we have some vocabularies for elements that are determined within ISBD itself, such as frame alignment. For those of you who are interested, the two values are comic and cine, and I have been unable to find these ever registered as a controlled value vocabulary anywhere. Another set of values are controlled by other IFLA bodies, such as the Permanent Unimark Committee or the catalogue section. I've discussed Unimark already. It has many controlled vocabularies for coded fields. The cataloging section maintains anonymous classics and names of persons, both of which are examples of data sets for individuals or instances. And we've mentioned several times the RDA-ONIX categories, which are maintained by the RDA Steering Committee currently. And there are others that are maintained by external bodies. So in each of these categories, should we be prescribing, recommending, mentioning, or ignoring specific controlled vocabularies for ISBD? How do we prescribe, recommend, mention, or ignore any of these vocabularies? Do we embed them in the stipulations, link to them from within ISBD for M, or provide some kind of reference appendix at the end of ISBDM that would provide citations for these things? I alluded in my earlier presentation to the way that we can ensure the integrity of relationship elements by restricting the values to an IRI, an identifier, or an authorized access point. This has been embedded in the draft ISBDM. So for relationship elements, we have taken the draft decision not to prescribe any vocabularies at all. That is, we are not going to say use VAF or LCNAF or any of the data set vocabularies. The reason is we doubt very much whether all users of ISBDM would agree on what that prescribed vocabulary should be. Within the stipulations, we say that the value must be an IRI, this is a preference order, an identifier from the data set, such as an authority control number, an authorized access point, authority label from the same data set, or construct your own access point from a string encoding scheme. Remember, attribute and relationship elements are different in their basic characteristics. Attribute elements, then we have made a decision to have some prescribed vocabulary, such as the RDA-omics framework carrier type. The prescription of values is also in a preference order, and it parallels that for relationship elements. We would prefer an IRI over an identifier or code over a preferred term. And then we are still investigating whether uncontrolled local terms should be attribute elements or note elements. It's an interesting discussion. So that was just to show you where some of these rabbit holes lead. But that's roughly the work of the prescription and granularity task and finish group. Thank you.
Thank you, Gorn, and the task seems to be challenging. So I mentioned that we established 2 sub-working groups, 2 task and finish working groups at the end of last year, and I'm happy now that last but not least, I would like to introduce to you Mirna Willer. Her background is she's a retired professor from the University of Sadar, the Department of Information Sciences, and she's a member of our task force, and she's our liaising person and consultant with the IFLA Permanent Unimark Committee, with the PUC. And she's monitoring the second task and finish sub-working group for examples. Mirna, we are keen to hear your presentation now.
Thank you very much, Renate. In a way, this presentation, which comes at the end of this section of presenting the issues of the ISBDM, ends with examples, which is constituent part of any standard. Why this group? So examples in the current ISBD are not suitable for ISBD for manifestation because they assume a context of the resource that is too broad for manifestation entity that had been described and discussed a lot today. Then they conflate transcription and recording, which, as we have heard, are separated in ISBDM. And then they embed prescribed punctuation that is not appropriate for ISBDM. Also, we have to notice that the coverage of examples for different category of manifestation is uneven. There is a ponderance of examples of printed volume created within the tradition of Western publishing methods. Then the only non-Latin scripts appear to be CJK, that is Chinese, Japanese, Korean, with very few examples in Cyrillic. And then there is no really representation of any language of indigenous minorities or of any African languages. So the aim of the ISBD examples task and finish group is to investigate the specific issues for the ISBD for manifestation task force has identified, and to make recommendations. And then I'm going to detail on the specific issues. To propose examples for specific stipulations and areas of guidance, and also propose full examples for general categories of manifestation that provide context for specific stipulations, and also context for operational metadata that is based on the ISBDM. Of course, a report back to ISBD for Manifestation Task Force. So you can see here the first issue. The first issue is an editorial note. So the question is an editorial note or an explanatory note necessary or required to explain some examples or some stipulations? Here we see a kind of general explanatory note. This is part of the general section on preliminary assessment, in this case, number of units. So are such general notes necessary? Issue number 2. Is it better for readability if the element label is repeated for each example, like we see here, has place associated with manifestation again and again, or is only given for the first example under stipulation? In this way, while repeating the element label, we are in fact shifting the focus of context from record to entity-based structured metadata. So we are explicitly stating that each of these element is one particular type of data. Here we can also see recording methods or types that Gordon has just been talking about. For example, you can express the place which is associated with manifestation, either as an authorized access point of an entity or an identifier of entity in a particular information system, let's say database authority system. Then you can also express it as a stringified IRI of an entity. That is, you make a string that is of an IRI or an IRI of entity. Another issue that we would like to talk about, and the question is full examples or complete examples. So one of the issue is, can an extract of a complete example set be used as an example of a stipulation for a specific element to illustrate the context? And linked to that also is the issue of, is it feasible to include reproductions of sources of information for manifestation and note elements for complete examples for manifestation statement and note element? This is, of course, also considered an issue of copyright. So to deal with this in an interactive online version or a PDF version. Here I will. Here you have an example of the same screenshot of the same example that Gordon has shown you, and presented you with his version of how he would present that data. So I'm just going in this next slide. I'm just going to take you through the elements of this example to show you how it can work. So first, as Mikael has stressed out, we have to do an assessment. Are we dealing with one unit? Is it a one unit? That is one or more units. We are dealing here with one unit. Is this a single printed volume? Is there one or more expressions? We assume that here is just one expression. And the issue of completeness of content. Is it a static or diachronic work? It is a novel, so it is a static work. So first element is manifestation statement of title and responsibility. and the transcription rules, which Mikael has particularly emphasized, and we've been discussing this basically in all the presentation, is to transcribe statement as on the item, or as on the manifestation. And in this way, we are following the representation principle of the ICP. So the stipulation says to transcribe data as they are on the without any additions or corrections. And in the case where there are indentation or new lines, just replace it with one space, a single space. The stipulation also say to add some kind of punctuation to make to improve the clarity of the statement. So comma was introduced. The next three, as you can see, statements refer to his manifestation statement of publication, production, manufacture, and or distribution, in which we describe, in which we transcribe a statement that are found on the manifestation. The first one is most prominent one. The second one is the fullest statement, which gives the date of publication. And the third one is the statement that gives place of publication, which all the statements that are found in different places of a publication. A manifestation statement of identifier and terms of availability. In fact, we transcribe all the data, all the identifiers given in the statement. Although they are not assigned to the manifestation we are describing, because we are describing a hardback manifestation. So this is the end of the first part of description, and then follow what Gordon called label or labels or names or nomens, according to LRM nomenclature. So his title proper, this is a relationship element. And the new one, which is has authorized access point of manifestation. This is a new way of identifying or linking to a particular manifestation. In this case, ISBDM presents the cataloger with special instructions on a string encoding scheme, SES, that gives him instruction how to form this string encoding scheme. In this case, a normalized title proper, Paris apartment, name of publisher, and binding. His identifier of manifestation, here we record only the normalized hardback ISBN, because that's the one we are describing. The paperback is a separate manifestation. What we also want to say is his expression, a link to the expression embodied in manifestation. And here again, we have a guidance how to form a string encoding scheme for an authorized access point of expression. Then person associated with manifestation, collective agents, that's the publisher, place of publication, and date of publication. In this way, we have linked the statement part of the manifestation to the entities that are related to the manifestation. And this third part is the attribute one. Gordon was talking about it. And we have, in this example, We have only decided to talk about the category of carrier, category of embodied content, that is text, media type, unitary structure, and in this case, binding. But of course, this part is still under development, as Gordon has mentioned. So how to form these elements? Here in the introduction section, there is a subsection on display of description, which gives you a suggested order of presentation of element values. That is transcribe elements with relevant note elements, general note elements, attribute elements, and relationship elements with relevant note elements. And finally, the last issue is the publication format of ISBDM. Should it be an interactive online tool, the one we are describing to you, or a PDF? The problem here is the scaling problem. For example, in the PDF version, which is not applicable in the interactive online version. Here you can see the screen. On the left-hand side, we have examples that are hidden. So you can expand them to the full examples here on the right-hand side. The scaling problem is not relevant as to the full examples in PDF version because it can be a separate document. This also is an issue that we have considered regarding interactivity. For example, the user has more control in expanding and collapsing the contextual examples and functionality. In an interactive online version, we can leave the contextual example to a full example. And we think that this is very powerful for orientation and confirmation of overall context in operational cataloging. And the last one is the interactivity beyond ISBDM. While in our coordination with the Permanent UNIMARC Committee, we can aim to make UNIMARC manuals and ISBDM stipulations interact. We can click, for example, on an ISBDM element example and see how it is encoded in UNIMARC and vice versa. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mirna, for this insight in the examples sub-working group. We're coming to the end of our presentation session before we will start our panel session. And I'm very happy. I was looking into the Q&A section and I saw many questions and comments, and I think we will have a good discussion in our panel section after the 10 minutes break. But before we've finalizing our presentation session, I would like to summarize for you a bit where we are and where we would like to go. I would like to share another presentation. Hope it's fine for you. If not, let me know. Where are we coming from? The ISBD, the International Standard Bibliographic Description, as an IFLA standard, has to be actualized at least every 5 years. This is the same for all the IFLA standards. And so we had to fulfill this task. But the principles, the basic principles of the ISBD, that is a freely accessible standard for all published and unpublished bibliographic resources in all countries, or let it say better, in all communities, different cultural environments. This is the basic decision that we would like to keep and to fulfill with another. If you would like to inform you about everything of the ISBD, there is an IFLA, on the IFLA website, there is a site for the ISBD. You can read about the history and all other interesting things. The ISBD review group is concerned with this task to actualize and to keep it online, the standard. And we had a long-lasting discussion how to keep the ISBD, the current ISBD, actual in modern environments. But the basic decision we took in 2018, Rehab mentioned it so far, was to adapt as well these standards, these IFLA ISBD, to the IFLA LLM framework, because the IFLA LLM framework is the basis for all the standards for description in this environment. And so this was the basic decision. We would like to do this, but how we would like to do it, it was clear that we have to do it in 2 steps. And so we decided to do it at first on the manifestation level. That's where the name's coming from, ISBDM. But the basis for all what we are doing actually is that even the ISBDM as the former or the actual ISBD should be designed and should remain useful as a standalone standard, which will cover at the end of the day all LLM entities, but in a first step only for manifestation, because that's what's needed in the actual work. So what is the status of the work? Where are we now? We had worked out or basic documents for the further work. And in the last year, in summer, we had the chance to meet in Dublin and to have in person or a hybrid meeting of the ISBD review group. And we had the chance to take all other basic decisions. And so the task force, the ISBDM task force, had a good position to go ahead with our work. In the group, appropriate workflows had been worked out over the years, and an element set for these new ISBDM had been worked out. We worked out first drafts for the alignment of the ISBD according to the IFLA element. And as we heard now, we decided for 2 topics, for 2 special and very important topics, to establish 2 subgroups. This means, in an overview here we have the whole ISBD review group. In between is the ISBDM task force with so far only 6-7 people, and new since fall last year, these 2 subgroups. And these subgroups are really, and we all are very happy about this, that we had the chance to get to this work many colleagues from all around the world, because our intention is or was in the review group that the ISBDM should be as international as it could be. This means, for example, for the examples, many languages, many scripts, as many as we can. And the whole ISBD review group, that's this topic of organization, has to report to the Committee on Standards in between IFLA, which is the committee concerned with all IFLA standards. So what is our schedule for the further work? And this is a very ambitious schedule. We would like to have an ISBDM draft for discussion in the whole ISBD review group in April, May. It's not so long, so we hope that we can reach this goal. We would like to have a draft of the ISBDM for revision and commenting for the Congress, for the IFLA Congress, the World Library and Information Congress this year in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. We would like to have there an open discussion about this draft. This is just a planning issue, but to mention, we are so much interested as we are today now to get feedback and to discuss with you and keep in mind your comments and your ideas. And so perhaps if it could be possible, we would like to plan a webinar with other IFLA groups concerned with standards to have this discussion about the new ISBDM. We hope to have a formal draft for adoption by the ISBD review group in fall, in September or October this year. And after this, after the ISBD review group as a whole has give their okay for the formal draft, then we would like to have the worldwide review phase, perhaps until end of January in 2024. This is a good tradition IFLA has, that new standards goes through, and mostly the very much important standards. Some of you may remember the worldwide review of the LRM itself. It's a good tradition, I think, to have a worldwide review and then to get feedback and to work this into the draft and to have then a final draft at the beginning in 1 year. For the Committee on Standards, which is the concerned body, as I described, for the final decision and approval of the new ISBDM. And if everything, I mentioned that it is ambitious, but we would like to bring it forward to this, and then there can be a publication in 2024. As Mirna mentioned and others, we have liaisons and contacts with other IFLA bodies as well. A good tradition IFLA working groups are having, and so we are in an active exchange about what we are doing and bringing in their comments and ideas. So thank you so far for your attention, for listening to us, thank you to all the presenters. To be in time, it was perfect. So we now can have a break, a short comfort break, about a bit more than 10 minutes, and perhaps everybody can be back. We will start our panel discussion with your comments, with your questions. If something comes in your mind, please write into the Q&A section. Further comments or questions, and we will see each other again. So here we are, back again. Thank you all for coming back to the second and last part of our webinar today, our panel discussion. And first of all, I would like to say thank you to Sabina Esaide, which provided us a technical backup and background, which is very important for such an event, and for monitoring the Q&A section. And thank you for doing this, Beth. And now we are happy to hear the questions.
First, are the questions about what the publication of ISBDM means to the use of other ISBDs. So the questions, we will continue to use the consolidated ISBDs with these changes. And will the current ISBDM stay online as an IFLA standard for country systems that are not able to switch to entity cataloging yet?
Who would like to give a feedback to this? Gordon, please.
Well, the ISBD for manifestation group is acting under the assumption that the consolidated ISBD will be discontinued in due course. Renate has already pointed out that the ISBD review group with the Committee on Standards and preceded by a 3-year survey of possible options decided to switch the ISBD to be an implementation of the LRM. And the current ISBD, as we've repeatedly said, has no relationship to the current LRM. And so that decision inevitably means, in my view, certainly, that the current consolidated ISBD, and certainly my understanding is that the last update that was applied will be the final update, and at some point in the future it will be removed because IFLA will no longer be willing to maintain it. But that's my view.
Yes, and that's what we discussed it a long time ago, I think. And as I said in my short summary, which I gave before our break, all IFLA standards has to be updated. That's mandatory. And we discussed how to fulfill this, and we made this plan. And it's an announcement or a commitment of the Committee on Standards that the IFLA LRM as the basic model for all concerned standards has to be fulfilled. And so the ISBD has to follow this approach. And then on the time when the ISBDM will be finalized, there will not be a not LRM'd ISBD any longer. Naturally, sure, there has to be a smooth transition, and if you take into account how long we are discussing and working on this, it will not come immediately and unexpected and from one day to another. And the decision was made too. We were in the process of how to update the ISBD, but we acknowledge that many communities worldwide are using ISBD, and then the last version, the just updated version, was produced from a special task force in between the ISBD review group as well, for this long transition phase, to have something a bit actualized for the time being until the ISBDM will be finalized. Mirna.
Sorry.
Excuse me, I would just like to add another point, and this is the technology. We are in fact entering a new really new paradigm shift with the technology of the semantic web and linked data, linked open data. So both LRM and consequently ISBDM are based on that technology. So it is the standard that is prepared for this new technology, which ISBDM wasn't. It really served us very well all these years, but has also helped us to enter the new technology. Yes. So that's from my part.
Yes, and important. I hope we could answer this question. Sabina?
To adopt ISBDM from ISBD, any requirements on the library systems or LSPs, any conversion we need to do for the legacy records?
Gordon, yes.
I have the same response, unfortunately. The legacy metadata is likely to be entirely incompatible, and the presentations have offered a good half dozen reasons as to why it will be entirely incompatible with, and I'm not going to say ISBDM, it's entirely incompatible with IFLA's models, full stop. And therefore, unfortunately, although some conversion may be possible, in the main, I don't see it happening. We have been able, I think I said this in my presentation, Mirna mentioned it too, we have been able to broaden certain things, make them less granular, which makes it easier to fit legacy metadata in, because the scope is broader. We've provided notes, etc., and it would be possible to transfer current ISBD data into ISBDM, but mostly as notes. So the data can be preserved, but it cannot be fitted into the semantic structure of the LRM. And so I think Mikael said this, the notes, you can do anything you want with them. And so you can put legacy metadata into them. And the best that the system can do with them is keyword index them, which actually gives you the same level of data functionality as the current ISBD. So in fact, you wouldn't lose any functionality, but it would not look the same. I have to stress that.
Anybody else from you would like to add something to Gordon's explanation? Not so far. Then we can go to the next question.
The next group is about ISBDM's relationship to RDA. Can you speak more to the compatibility of RDA and ISBDM metadata and namespaces? Will this work lead to more RDA elements being deprecated to stay in alignment? And does the development of ISBDM affect uptake of RDA? And would you say that basing ISBDM on RDA is a way for IFLA to start integrating RDA as an IFLA standard? Is there an official position of IFLA on this subject? Can other standards, such as Unimark, refer to RDA from now on?
Many questions in one question.
I tried to read all, but
Sure,
I can
it's
repeat.
Yes, it's great. They are going all in the same direction.
Yes.
We have to state that RDA is not an IFLA standard. It's coming from different community. It's another organization, and it will not become an IFLA standard. But we don't have to talk, I think, in the future and now as well. We have to talk about interoperability. And that's why we all are having an RDA is fully based on LRM. And that's what we are having. And that's our outgoing point. And in a modern world, and the cataloging world, let's say, has changed in the last years so much. Perhaps we could not say this is the one and only standard for this and that. So that's why we have to be compatible, we have to be interoperable with all our standards, and it differs so much, the use of standards. May it be the new ISBDM, may it be RDA. It depends on the user community, what standard they have to use, and sometimes even more granular of the community or the collection. If you're thinking about an institution treating with legal deposit, it will be very much different than a public library or a museums community, or even more granular. I worked very much in the last years with museums and archives communities, and they telling me we don't have people who can use such a broad standard like RDA. We need to have something simple. And so the standards are not staying on their own. They are, it's a whole picture of standards that we coming to in a modern cataloging world. And that's where RDA and ISBDM and whatever have their places. But they have to be interoperable, and that's RDA, LRM is the turning point. Yes, Gordon, please.
Tell me to stop, Renate, if I go into too much detail, but I think it's worth saying that all of this has been comprehensively discussed within IFLA.
Yeah.
Prior to the decision that Renate mentioned to start the ISBDM initiative, and with reference to the 5-year review cycle, some of you may know that ISBD had not been reviewed for 8 or 9 years at that point. So where's the 5-year cycle? The reason is that the Committee on Standards wanted to address the very question that we are now addressing here, which is what is the relationship between RDA, which claims to be a complete full implementation of the LRM, and ISBD, IFLA's own content standard. And the review group was asked to examine 3 scenarios and bring forward recommendations as to how to proceed. And the three scenarios were to abandon ISBD completely and recommend the use of RDA instead. In other words, IFLA would not maintain a content standard, and it would not attempt to purchase RDA. RDA is a commercial standard. It's owned by 3 library associations, not IFLA. The second option was to use the planned development of RDA, the 3R project, to add IFLA or ISBD as a policy statement agency, just like the British Library or the Library of Congress or the Music Libraries Association. In fact, ISBD would be closer to the MLA than it would be to an individual institution. This would be perfectly feasible. ISBD could address what Renate has just mentioned, which is some libraries and some communities find RDA has far too many options, far too many choices, when they really want to be told what the best approach is. So ISBD could do that. It could have policy statements saying use this or don't use this element, just like the British Library does. The third option was to develop ISBD as an implementation of the LRM itself, as a separate, something separate from RDA, but it has to be completely compatible with RDA. So when we say it has to be compatible with the LRM, it has to be an implementation of the LRM, we are automatically saying, mostly, that it has to be compatible with RDA, because RDA is a complete implementation of the LRM. Nobody is disputing what I'm saying, so I'm assuming that this is not a contentious statement. So it's that third option that the review group recommended to COS, and this is what we're doing right now. We are producing an implementation, not a full implementation, it's only one entity at the moment, of the library reference model. It's a model, a conceptual model, not a full data model. So there are questions about how far IFLA wants to go with the actual entities, etc. But all the work we're doing is under the constraint that everything must be interoperable with RDA. So all of the elements, attributes and relationships can be mapped to equivalent RDA. So sometimes there's going to be a loss of granularity, but in general, everything that's produced from ISBD for manifestation should be able to be used in an RDA environment with one of the maps that I mentioned in my presentation that would map from the ISBD elements to the RDA elements, but those maps are being pre-built basically into the process. So that's the relationship. It's primarily political, not technical. Technical, there's nothing to distinguish between the two. But politically, as Renate has said, one is IFLA, you know, with IFLA management, blah, blah, IFLA's direction, strategies. And the other one is the American Library Association, the Canadian Libraries Federation, and the Australian Libraries Association. So although they're looking at the same thing, they are being maintained under very different contexts. It would be lovely in an ideal world if we were just dealing with RDA, but we don't live in an ideal world, and that's that. The other thing I'd say about that is that there was a reference there, will any RDA elements get deprecated? That's really quite interesting and perceptive question to ask. But the answer is quite a brutal no, because of what I've just described. RDA should have made all these decisions already. The decisions that ISBDM makes should not impact on RDA at all. There'd be something dreadfully wrong if that was the case. What the situation is that RDA contains legacy structures and elements that were originally derived from ISBD via AACR2. And that's what you're seeing is the common roots coming through 30, 40 years later with RDA, RSC took the decision to retain everything unless it didn't fit with the LRM. And so it's retained certain things that ISBD is not going to add. They're not in ISBD right now. We're not going to add them just to be compatible with RDA. So it's rather the other way around, which ISBD elements will be deprecated because RDA already has them. So I wanted to make that very, very clear because I know a lot of people are interested as what the relationship, because often it's the same people. Renate's a chair of RSC. I'm an ex-chair of RSC. Mirna's a chair of the ISBD, an ex-chair of the ISBD review group. Rehab is the chair of the ISBD review group. So all the chairs apparently are, you know, cross-chairing stuff. So why don't we just, you know, declare peace and love and we'll all do the one thing? But it's not real life, unfortunately.
But we're talking to each other.
We do, and sometimes we talk to ourselves without having an argument.
Thank you, Gordon, for this wise. Yeah, I hope these helps, these explanations. We discussed it a lot in our communities. We will discuss it further on, so it's good to bring it up here again, and we will talk about this in the next future as well, I think. So, but I think we can go ahead with the questions, perhaps, Sabina.
The next is ISBDM only focuses on books or other special material as well?
Not for all published and unpublished resources, as we mentioned, and even the update was added into this sense. So books is no longer a thing what we are focused on or what communities are focused on. That's not the real world in where we are. But perhaps I give it in the round. Perhaps one of you can give an answer to this question.
Well, I have noticed a question about manuscript, all the rare books.
Yeah, that would be the next one.
Next one. So should I continue with that? Or
Yeah, absolutely.
We are very careful also about that because we know that there is a lot of this type of material, especially so because there is a lot of digitization projects, digital humanities projects, which really need to have a very good description of rare book material and, of course, of digitized rare book materials. So that's why we have taken as examples. Perhaps I should just go one step back. So while working on the stipulations, we've been in parallel working on the examples to see how the stipulations
oh, sorry, we have some connection problems with Mirna, so yeah, for the time being.
Manuscripts and digitized manuscripts. So this is something that we are very keen on dealing with. I think there was also the issue of letters that usually do not have something that we would call the title or statement, manifestation statement, title and statement of responsibility or something like that. We haven't dealt with that in particular, but we can take that as an example and see how stipulation deal with such an issue. Also, although in a way we have a mechanism for that, if and there is a stipulation if manifestation doesn't have a title, what we call a title statement of title statement. then there is a mechanism how to deal with this, how to form title that is access manifestation, authorized access point for the manifestation. This is one of the mechanisms to deal with that. But that is, of course, we are going to discuss that further. Gordon.
And then
there's something interesting behind the question, I think, which is worth saying. If you look at ISBD, it does appear to be mainly focused on print books. That's the impression you get. You look at it, you think this is all about print books. There's a reason for that, because it was all about print books when ISBD was first being developed. E-books didn't exist, online resources didn't exist, etc., etc. The areas in the traditional ISBD are based on the layout of the title page of a printed book. And this is one reason why I think IFLA was quite right to say it would no longer maintain the current ISBD, because its foundations have completely shifted. We're no longer trying to make everything look like a printed book because it's convenient for the user and consistent, etc. The book that we chose for the examples, the Paris Apartment by Foley, was chosen because it was very, very simple. It's, as Mirna said, one volume, etc., one expression. Very, very simple. When you look at it, as we showed, I think, on the slides, it has no date it has date of publication in one place. It's not on the title page front. Title page front only says HarperCollins Publishers. There's no place of publication mentioned. There's no date of publication mentioned. These are found elsewhere. When looking at these things, I've come across books which simply have nothing but the branding of the publisher. Modern printed books have stopped putting dates and places on them, go figure. So everything has shifted. And I think it's quite right for somebody to say, is it going to move beyond printed books? I think Mirna made the big point there that it's not just printed books, it's languages, it's printed books from certain cultures that ISBD's focused on. And then there's all these other cultures that may or may not print books, etc., that were ignored until recently with the consolidated edition. That did attempt to make it all published materials. I have to say that for sure. And then the recent update extended it to all unpublished materials. And we are obviously continuing that scope and coverage, everything. If it stays still, describe it with ISBD.
Thank you, Gordon. Mikael, then Rehab.
Yes, since I work with ISSN, I feel responsible to mention the third characteristics we talked about, completeness of content. So if something is not complete, that means that it's a serial work. So it could, and I know that, and it's usually the case, the simple examples are always the monographs or the books. And I think we have some difficulties with diachronic works. We haven't really established all the possibilities, but we have attempted to make some examples, but they're not been published yet. So those would be journals, websites. So both integrating works and successive works, to speak RDA terminology.
Yeah, thank you, Mikael. Rehab.
Yes, so To second what Renate and Gordon has said, the ISBD was for published material, and it's now with the update for unpublished also, which covers mainly the manuscripts. But the ISBDM, I think that the question was about the ISBDM. The ISBDM with all the content, career, and media type vocabularies will be able to describe any combine. If you make your combination, you will be able to describe any type of material you want. There is also another dimension that there are in the current ISBD some because we were shredding the stipulation, and we noticed that out of the stipulations, there are material-specific stipulations that gives instruction on how to transcribe or record certain type of material, and this will be also looking at later in due course.
Yes.
So it's the ISBDM will be optimized to describe, if we develop it the way we intend, and that you have seen a glimpse of it today, to describe any material that you can have,
and that is fit for the reality in the institutions who are using it, because we have so much mixed collections now, no longer books only. I hope this question could be answered in respect of the time, and I see there are some more questions pending in the Q&A section, so please, Sabina, let us know.
Can you give examples of how ISBDM can improve the level of description of, say, an online resource or a group of research writing compared to what is currently available with ISBD?
Who would like to answer? I think it goes a bit in the same direction.
I think we've covered this, Renate. Yeah. With the last one.
Yeah.
The emphasis on print has been de-emphasized. We're de-emphasizing any legacy print focus that is in the current ISBD, and that means we are seeking to have an equal treatment of all kinds of materials. So equal treatment is the other buzzword here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, phase 2 is to expand phase 1. Traditional ISBD focused only description that is a manifestation item. How ISBDM covers the work and expression. That means ISBDM will have rules about the access point like RDA.
We are in a process, and that was the decision was taken in 2018 to fulfill these actualization, because it's not only an update, it's a complete actualization of the ISBDM in 2 steps. First, only on the manifestation level, because the decision was taken because we were aware that it will take too much time if we would start with a whole LLM package, let's say. But in a second step, the ISBD should be developed from ISBDM to ISBD LRM, but in a second step. So perhaps others will add something. It's just the first step, the manifestation level, because this is what we thought, what is used mostly, what is needed mostly in the library world, in the cataloging world, and we would like to provide and have a final product in the near future, and not in 10 years or something like this. Now, Rehab and Mirna.
Not covered. We didn't develop at this stage the ISBDM for other entities developing their elements and sub-elements and so on, but they will be partially covered through relationship elements. So we have them like provisions, and also I think that Mirna can add more.
Mirna, please.
Yes, perhaps this is going into detail now, but in a way, this problem is solved at two levels. The first level is the label of an entity. For example, title proper is title proper because it is characteristic only for manifestation. But if we are talking about authorized access point for expression, we have to say this is an authorized access point for expression or an authorized access point for manifestation, so that in future work, in the second phase, we wouldn't have to change the terminology of elements. This is at the basic, so say the basic level. However, we have recently defined and updated because the version of the ISBDM, which we update regularly each month, at the beginning of each month, with the decisions we have made before, with something that I have mentioned in my presentation, and this is string encoded schemes. How do you form an authorized access point if you cannot link to an IRI or of the linked entity, or to the authorized to the identifier of let's say local or union authority file, etc. So this section on string encoding scheme for related entities tells you exactly, as I tried to show in the examples, which are the elements, how to compose of which elements each particular access point, authorized access point for a particular type of, for a particular link to a particular entity. I see Gordon is going to, of course, detail this. And what we have noticed is, of course, that we have to also link to the rules of a particular, in the case of names, to a particular adopted guidelines and standards. And Gordon has mentioned anonymous classics or names of persons. So this is the issue that also is the issue on table with prescription and granularity task group, but also the issue for the whole ISBDM task force to discuss as a general issue. Gordon, perhaps you would like to add something to this.
Yeah, ISBDM will not be telling you how to construct an authorized access point. That wouldn't make any sense, because we've already made the decision not to recommend any particular instance vocabulary like VIAF, which uses its own construction of access points. So what we're providing, and what Mirna has shown, is guidance on the components of an access point, which elements should be used for the base. This is based on FRAD, right? The LRM does not go into this at all, whereas FRAD did, and the LRM very clearly explains that the whole of FRAD was subsumed with FRASAD into the res kind of thing. So there's no guidance, no model on this in LRM. We took the decision for global reasons, compatibility and interoperability reasons, that we could not specify that you must take your person from name authority file or VIAF. You must take your name of place from a particular thesaurus or gazetteer or something. So because we made that decision, we cannot make a decision. We cannot say how to construct an access point. What we can do is say, these are the traditional components of a base access point. This is Frad talking, base plus qualifiers. And we can say, here are the kinds of elements that you might want to qualify your access point for. What we cannot do is say that this is mandatory. We cannot say what the punctuation will be to create the access point string. We cannot say what the sequence is. And within the project group, when we look at our working full examples, the one that Mirna mentioned we're using in order to test the stipulations themselves, what you will see is a complete divergence. Because, and we've done this deliberately, you know, there is the Dunsire string encoding scheme for people, and then there is the Willer string encoding scheme for people. And this has been done quite deliberately so that you can, we, not the external users of ISBDM, so that we can get our thinking straight about this because it's complicated. But one of the questions is, will you be providing instructions on how to create AAPs? And the answer is no. We will be providing a lot of good guidance on how to create AAPs, but not stipulations.
Thank you, Gon and Mikael.
I just wanted to mention that there might be one exception to the prescription of IRIs to identifiers. If you want to record a relationship to a diachronic incomplete diachronic work, the IRI would need to be from the ISM portal.
Yeah, but that's not, we're not talking about IRIs, we're talking about access point construction. Yeah. So you're right, and it's worthwhile pointing it out that we do have certain mandatory stipulations within ISBD for manifestation concerning how things are linked together, and ISSN is one of them. ISBN is not one of them. That's a whole separate webinar. But ISSN is one of them because it is a rock solid, well-established instance directory. And so we can stipulate it and make it mandatory.
Okay, thank you.
And we're not dealing with work either. ISSN is a work identifier. I'll just point this out to the pedants in the audience. You see, dealing only with manifestation really allows us to throw away a huge amount of complex stuff. We'll still have to tackle it in phase 2, but right now.
It will come back. Yeah. So thank you for this, and I think we should go ahead. Sabina.
The next one. I find it surprising that in the manifestation statement for title and responsibility, a punctuation mark, a comma, was introduced for readability reasons. This is totally at odds with the principle of representation, which was rightfully mentioned as the basic principle for ISBDM. In ICP, the representation principle was introduced to enable a machine to comply all manifestation statements as far as possible. How should a machine insert a comma to be inserted for readability reasons? Is this not a step backwards?
Good.
Well, it's not true, what was said in the question, that ICP has the principle of representation to allow machine transcription. That's completely untrue. That is the unnormalized transcription rules of RDA, WYSIWYG, which are intended to for pure machine transcription. RDA offers a choice of 3 options. Basically, it says use what you see is what you get. You don't add punctuation. Everything remains in uppercase. Blah 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 blah. Or it says use normalized transcription. That is the choice of ISBDM as well, because the ISBD review group does not really like the idea of having these statements transcribed all in uppercase. or without some form of clarifying punctuation mark. The RDA transcription rules do include the insertion of clarifying punctuation, so we remain compatible with the RDA. It's not by any means exactly the same transcription rules, but they're compatible enough so that when you keyword index the results, you end up with identical indexes. And that's all we can do with manifestation statements. The rest of it is pure display.
Yeah.
So the first point is it's not the case that either ICP or indeed RDA introduced this specifically for machine transcription. It has been said in RDA discussions that it lends itself to machine transcription. It allows you to take out your smartphone, hit an app, and have all of the manifestations transcribed for you, which will save you a few fingers on keyboards and be more accurate maybe. But we've never said it's the only reason for it. The main reason is the principle itself, which is this is how the manifestation represents itself. This is how it's intending to represent itself. It represents itself in 2 dimensions. That is a title page. It has layout, it has white space, it has new lines, paragraph formatting, and all sorts of stuff that cannot be emulated in metadata. And therefore, both RDA and ISBDM say, collapse all the white space to one space. And when you do that, sometimes the results are just a mess. So add a punctuation mark just to clarify it.
Thank you, Gordon. 15 minutes left for all our interesting questions that are waiting. Perhaps we reach to answer some of them.
Gordon's articulation of the sample ISBDM entry has distinctly labeled components relevant to information corresponding to imprint, publisher, place of publication, date. In the ISBDM, are these then considered distinct elements or sub-elements of a larger statement regarding imprint?
This question will be answered by me via a very indirect route and Renate in due course. That's the paper I sent you yesterday, Renate, explaining all of this. I know what the discussion topic is. It's the forthcoming Mark Advisory Committee discussion paper on publication statement. I know where it's coming from. Yeah. The short answer is no. The example I chose actually was designed to illustrate this very point. So thank you to John for picking it up. The only imprint, as I've already stated, on that book is HarperCollins Publishers on the title page. That's it. And then on the back, it's got the usual first published in the United Kingdom, blah, 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 blah. And then somewhere later, it's got something else which actually mentions the 2 places of publication, Dublin or London or whatever. And that is how the manifestation represents itself. But from that and from other sources of information, we do know the date of publication, we do know the publisher name, and we do know the place of publication. So we can record those, wait a minute, place as an entity, corporate collective agents an entity, the publisher, and date as a time span, that's another entity. Therefore, they're all relationship entity and relationship elements. And so we go to the rule for relationship elements and say, you're not transcribing anything, you are using an IRI or an access point or an identifier taken from a pre-controlled situation, or you're creating your own through a string encoding scheme, as we've just discussed. So there are 2 separate sources of data on that example that I showed that under current ISBD would have been collapsed down into 1. But in the new ISBD, we have to separate them out into what is transcribed and what is recorded. We don't need the intermediary publication statement because ISBD has no relationship elements that it needed to squeeze into that in the first place, whereas RDA did. RDA retained the publication statement element through 3R because, and I repeat what I said earlier, RSC said don't throw anything out that doesn't contradict the LRM, so it retained it. But we don't need to retain this in ISBD because it's connected with manifestation statement granularity, which we've already discussed.
Yes, thank you for clarification.
Would you please speak about using multi-metadata format compatibility with ISBDM data? XML or bitframe XML is one of the formats for ISBDM.
Go on,
Yeah,
yes.
sorry, it's a tech. I'll
No,
do
no.
So BibFrame XML is not an encoding format. The encoding format is RDF XML, and you then apply your particular vocabulary, you express it. So there is ISBD, RDF XML, there is RDA, RDF XML, there is BibFrame, RDF XML. They're all RDF XML. I pointed out in my presentation that unlike RDA, ISBDM is not going to support implementation scenarios C and D, which are bib authority and flat file. I deliberately said that in the presentation. I know the question was asked before that, so. But I said that deliberately. So unlike RDA, ISBDM right now is only looking at the linked data scenario and at the relational data scenario. If it's linked data, you use an IRI. If it's relational database, you use an authorized access point or string matching algorithm to make the links. Again, it will disappoint some people, but I cannot see any way that ISBD for LRM should attempt to go back and reinvent an old wheel that's already fallen off the truck, both in RDA and in Mark 21 terms. So yeah, the answer is no, we won't be looking at that. We'll only be looking at the linked data scenarios, either semantic linked data or string linked data. And this is, I think Renate said this is according to IFLA's requirements.
Yeah. I just saw in the Q&A section something perhaps that we should add to the question a bit before, that historical IFLA standards of publications, IFLA store it in an archive and they will be accessible. So the current ISBD will be accessible for everybody who needs it in a repository. It will not be away and forever and nobody can see it, but it will not be the official and actual ISBD any longer when ISBDM will be finalized. Thank you, Pat, for mentioning this.
I think, Renate, it's also worth mentioning that it's a CC0 anyway, and anybody's free to copy the ISBD and republish it themselves. So completely open. If a community wishes to continue to maintain the ISBD, all they they'd have to talk to COS first, but I see nothing in principle or practice to prevent them doing so. Yeah,
exactly. So 2 questions are left in the Q&A section. Sabina.
Gordon, could you explain the concept of global utility and how it can avoid the pitfalls that make UBC fail?
So this is to do with semantic interoperability. And basically, if I call it a dog and you call it a chien, then we're talking about the same thing, even though we label them differently. So if I say, that's my label for something to do with dogginess, and that's the French label for something to do with dogginess, then it doesn't matter that we've said 2 different things. We both know we're talking about something to do with dogginess. And the thing to do with dogginess is which entity and which element are you using, not what the value is. So you switch the consistency from the values, which you allow to be inconsistent, and you replace it with semantic mapping, which allows you to say in the same way that we don't bother that people translate metadata into different languages. So why are we bothered if people use different words in the first place? I know that there's a much bigger, long explanation behind that, but that'll do for Matilda at the moment, I think.
Thank you. One question left.
In ISBDM examples, differentiation between label, relationships, and attributes is not clear for me. Label could be changed to relationship elements. For example, has title or has identifier.
They are relationship elements. There's a misunderstanding there. Mirna said it very plainly. These are all relationships to the nomen entity. So they are relationship elements, but they're related to the nomen entity, which I keep saying is weird and therefore requires separate treatment from everything else. And that's why they're in their own separate little section.
No questions left.
Mirna, you would like to add something to this question?
Well, this is in fact what Gordon showed was his way of how he would present data to the user, how to display data to the user. So instead of explaining these are nomens of entities, of entity, manifestation entity, or of the agent entity or expression or work, which are specific, which are real nomens of these relationships, so to say. So he used the word label. So that's it. That's nothing. He could have used any other word, I would say, for this set of metadata that are presented to the users. So, but they are, of course, nomens as correctly understood in the question. They are relationships.
Thank you, Mirna. No question. We answered all the questions. I'm so happy about this. We are in time. So, Rehab, you can add something.
Yes, just to come back for clarification about this superseded ISBD, as Pat has mentioned in the Q&A. Yes, we are not going to take it. We were talking about we are not going to maintain it. Meaning that we can not go and accept proposal and go and update the consolidated edition or its update, but it will be there for whomever agency, community, catalogers to use it if they prefer it. That's only a small clarification about what has been developed or elaborated in this regard. There will still be in the IFLA repository, and you can access it.
Yeah,
but no longer maintained.
They remain free accessible for everybody, for every community. So we're good in time. In the chat, I'm seeing thanks for the webinar. And I can say thank you to you all. I would like to say for staying with us on what time ever you are having on your time zone. And we are very happy, and the questions showed us that these are the topics we were discussing all the time long, that we are at the same level, and that's so much interesting for us to have your feedback. And we're proposing to have a review phase, a worldwide review phase, and we are eager to have, and perhaps we can have in fall this year another webinar, information session or whatever, to talk about a more final draft, going to a final draft. And we are eager to hear what you're thinking and that's a big profit for us to get your opinions, your ideas, even if you have critics, let us know. Thank you so much for your patience, for giving us your time. And I wish you all have a good evening, morning, day, whatever it will be, good night. So stay well, see you soon, and bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.